So we have this topic of the entire week, where disruption unleashes creativity. And as I said, I'm a social scientist, so when I try to figure out what these things even mean, I go to Google and I type it in. And because I'm a very visual person, I go to Google image search and I see what that means. And so I typed in disruption to get a feeling for what it is that I'm supposed to talk about today, and this came up. And there are two things that struck me. And the first one is disruption seems to have to do something with airplanes. And I have no idea what it means, but if you look at these pictures, it's always airplanes, and one of them goes into a different direction. And me and Leyla, we had a talk before that we both have a neck for very odd metaphors. I have no idea what it means, but it seems to be a thing, so take that away from today. And the second thing I found is that this graph pops up a lot when you look at disruptive innovation. So that seems to explain something about disruption. So I looked at it a little bit closer, and actually, when you put it into the form of the key visual, it kind of looks like this. So this is something that was hinted at a couple of times before. This is the theory of disruptive innovation. And the theory goes like this. So you have a specific quality level that customers would like to have, and over time, products get a little bit better. And at the top, you have very demanding customers. So they are willing to pay a lot, but they need very feature-rich products. And at some point, a new innovation comes to the market, and it's disruptive when it's either very, very cheap, or it doesn't even cost a thing at all. And when this thing comes to market, the other products from the emerging companies look at it and say, well, that's shit. It's not very good. Look at its performance. It doesn't work at all. We don't need to compete with it much. It's cheap, but it's really not for our customers. And over time, this disruptive innovation gets better. And at some point, it's interesting for people that need only low-quality use because they say, well, it's free and I can use it, so that's interesting. And what happens then at the very top is that over time, it gets a little bit better and gets a little bit better. And these emergent, these incumbent companies, they say, well, the one thing we should do is add yet another feature to our product so it stays competitive and stays better, and our very high demanding customers are still willing to pay for it. And in the theory, it says, well, over time, more and more people will jump ship and go to this very cheap or even free alternative, this disruptive innovation, and then nothing is left for the incumbent company. And that is actually a theory 35 years old. It's called disruptive innovation. And the idea in the connection to creativity is if the companies are actually creative the way they're supposed to be, they find new features for their product, and that actually is what kills them in the end because they cannot compete in price. And that entire theory was developed by that guy. That guy is called Clayton Christensen, and you can see it's the same figure in the background. He wrote his PhD thesis about a couple of technical companies and then he came up with this theory. And he was a Mormon, and he was a Mormon priest and also a Mormon missionary. And he wrote one academic article in his life about his PhD thesis. And for the rest of his life, he went out to preach his theory. And he started doing that in the mid-90s, and he wrote a very successful book about how this disruption is happening, and then he wrote another book about how this is happening in healthcare. He wrote another book about how this is happening in education, and he always went out to give talks and presentations about the concept of disruptive innovation. And the big issue with his work is that people, especially in the fallout of the dot-com bubble, really liked the word disruption, so it was used everywhere. but not exactly like he intended in his theory. So for his entire life, he was walking around saying, well, you get the theory wrong. What you call disruption isn't disruption, it is something else, because that's the theory of disruption. It has to be either low cost or for free, otherwise it isn't disruptive. And people said, well, there's this disruptive online bookseller called Amazon, it's completely disrupting. It's not cheaper, it's not for free. So he was doing that for his entire life, saying this is disruptive innovation. So disruption seems to be a homonym, a word that has several meanings. And the difficult thing about it, it is a nested homonym. So one of the definitions is nested in what you think disruption is. And this is something so this is actually notes from an article I wanted to write years ago, and then my co-author kind of did something else, and we never really finished it. And I went, in the preparation for the talk today, which I had to edit last week, I went back to the notes that we did on this, and I found this sketch that we did in some preparation. I thought that's interesting for what we're talking about. So when we talk about disruption, this disruption seems to happen on different levels. And we take these levels and put them into a house of disruption, to understand these different theories about disruption. And the first one, what you see at the very top, we call this the business as usual rooftop. So if you have business as usual, companies are typically working on coordination, efficiency, and control. And typically, if you follow the literature, it's not the best environment for creativity, because you are very sure what your customers want, and you do something that's typically called an incremental innovation. And then on the third floor, you have disruption in markets. And disruption in markets basically means the overall product stays the same, but for instance, new technological possibilities allow for a very different product to take over the market. So a current example of disruption in markets is a shift from combustion engine cars to electric cars. And you would say it's still cars. We don't lease these cars in a different way. We don't buy them differently. We don't buy them in bunch. We still buy a single car, but it seems to have a different engine. And it seems to be a different product, and it seems to disrupt something in that market. And that is typically kind of what Clayton Christensen talked about. So it's what he has in his theory is always disruption within a market. So we have the theme of this week, disruption, why disruption unleashes creativity. And we are at this top floor of the house, disruption within markets, so market change. And the question now is, what does this mean for creativity? And the answer is, are you familiar with the sailing ship effect? The sailing ship effect is basically means the introduction of a new technology accelerates developments in the old technology. And this was first really intensively studied with sailing ships, hence the name sailing ship effect. In the 50 years after the introduction of the steamship, sailing ships made more improvements, more innovations than they did in the 300 years prior. So you have a disruptive technology, the steamship, which is better because you don't need wind. So you can basically go from A to B without wind, just by an engine. And the producers of sailboats see that and think to themselves, we really need to build better sailboats. And do that for 50 years. And it's a real avalanche of innovation that's happened at the tail end of commercial sailboats. That doesn't mean the sailboat that you use on the weekend to cruise around the Tegernsee. It means sailboats for cargo shipments. And it's really something where, in hindsight, you look at it and say, well, it's kind of obvious that it might be a better idea to use an engine for a boat. But every single person in the sail ship industry was in this industry for his entire life. That's what they were good at. And by seeing increase in competition, they thought, well, there's one thing we can do, and that is build better sailboats. And that's what they did. And the last one is disruption of the foundation. So what happens at the very core of what we live on? So there is this. This doesn't happen as often, but this is often claimed that this happens. So a disruption of the very foundations that make our society. So there is studies on these disruptions on the foundation. There's interesting studies in this unlearning literature of people that grew up in a socialist country and then moved into, or the country changed and then wasn't a socialist country anymore, how tough a time they had to adapt to, for instance, becoming a manager. This is one study I read, and I always kind of find funny about unlearning, where they said it was unthinkable to them to take responsibility, is what they found in their field notes, is that there wasn't a thing in like a socialist country. And but typically, these disruptions of foundations happen in very long waves, so it takes a very, very long time for them to happen if you aren't in a regime change, but they are called for more frequently than they actually appear because they make very good bestsellers. And if I give a talk now about technology, 9 out of 10 questions are about artificial intelligence, and typically they all hint into that direction, if that isn't like a completely change in the foundation of how we do creative work, for instance. And then we have an entire research group that looks into that, and if I talk to them, they say, that's more nuanced than that, and I tell them, you're never going to write a bestseller. Because that really doesn't sell. So what do we do with that? The problem with creativity is, as we've learned in disruption, it's very tough to say where exactly we are in this house, and only being creative might also make you run in the complete wrong direction, as we learned from the sailing ship effect. So the combination of creativity and disruption alone does not necessarily solve the problem that you have at hand. I wish it would be easier, so I could tell you the simple answer is be more creative and everything will be fine, but it isn't. So I brought in at least a picture for you to remember. So that's a little fox. I used to play a lot of baseball, and we always had a fox watching us playing baseball. And I don't know what a fox is interesting in, but probably thought that the ball might turn into a chicken or something. And then he looked from the sideline, and whenever you went too close to the fox ran away. But the next practice session, the fox was there again looking at the ball, seeing if they might turn into chicken. And I liked the fox as a metaphor because the fox was very curious in looking what's happening and really followed what's going on, but at the same time was very skeptical in his analysis, and when you came too close to it, it ran away. And I think it's a good metaphor to look at the challenges of how to deal with disruption, because people will tell you that things are far more disruptive than they actually are, because that sounds great. And on the other hand, people within organizations will tell that things aren't as disruptive as they might actually be, because that's what their experience is and everything they've collected so far. So as one takeaway, I would like to urge you to develop some kind of a skeptical curiosity to get your own vantage point on how disruptive a specific situation might actually be, and from that, then a direction in which creativity might go.
So tonight, I would like to all invite you to come with me on a quest that I've been doing for the last decade, the last 10 years. And this quest is, what is the role of a designer? It has been told in the first panel. We all think what the role of a designer could be, but if you are a designer and you graduate, then it's like, bam, it's reality. And that's a bit the journey I want to explain and I want to do with you. And therefore, I'm taking you to the very first project. Imagine I was 21 at that time. The very first project was also for school. They challenged me to innovate a waste management in the Philippines, in Cebu City. And of course, as a naive 21-year-old student, it was quite a challenge. Like, okay, how do you innovate a waste management? Anyway, I lived there for half a year, and I got inspired by talking to people, by getting to know the whole structure, the system, and eventually this came out. I saw a lot of junk shops, people who collect junk, materials we could reuse or reinterpretate. That's what they were doing already. So it's not that I'm the designer and I'm going to tell them like, hey, let's be creative with our materials here. No, people do this out of themselves. What we saw there is we had a lot of these metal fan guards, and we also saw a lot of craftsmanship. So what we did is we brought together two sectors, the sector of the junk shops and then the sector of weaving, resulting in this collection of fan lamps. And why do I start with this is because for me this was quite disruptive. I was a student at that time, and we got a chance to show this work at the Design Museum in Ghent. And for me this was like, okay, wow, so design could be socially infused. It could be about reusing materials, and it could also be accepted in a design museum. So not only for me, but also for my fellow designers and for fellow colleagues, this was kind of a little disruption. So the first question of this quest, or the first challenge is, what is the future of design? What is the role of a designer? And I recently became a father, so it's in my mind, and now it's also in my presentation. But the role of a designer, it's been like a focusing thing for me, like for 10 years. And when I look at it, I see design not as like, okay, you have to be the star. No, design could be maybe the ones who are in the background, or the ones that really have a change over a longer period. And I have some examples. Henri van der Velde, he was an architect, he was a painter. He lived an interesting time. It was the art and craft movement that was going on. And he actually managed to bring the artistic world together with the more technical world. And he was the forerunner of the Kunstgewerbeschule. Later it became the Bauhaus. It's quite known here. So for me, this was super interesting. Okay, bringing different people together and make even a stronger outcome. The other one, that a future designer should or could be responsive. Responsive in the way that the Eames couple also did, in a time that there was new technologies available. You have the plywood, the wood bending, that was used in the army. But they saw an opportunity, like, okay, what happens if we could use this technology and use it for a social challenge. And this social challenge was just after the Second World War. They needed to have more affordable furniture. Engaged, super important, and maybe not, I'm not sure if somebody is aware of this legend. It's Victor Papenek. He is especially known for his book. So he's a designer, he's an architect, he's an educator, but in the end, he strives for more safe products, more responsible designing. And what I find interesting about his case is that in the end, he designs products, of course, but in the end, he's more famous for his book than for all his products together. This came out in the 70s, beginning the 70s, and it's still printed and it's still the most read or the most common book if you're talking about the social approach in design. I asked ChatGPT for a metaphor for what I was all thinking, and he or she or non-binary or whatever, she told me, fire, you're a fighter. And I was like, not really. Search deeper, search better. And then gardener, he gave me a gardener, the metaphor gardener. And I kind of liked it, because as a gardener, you also have to take care of your crops. You have to nurture, you have to make sure they thrive. You also have to know when to crop or when to farm them. And above all, it's a cycle. So in the end, it dies and it becomes fertilizer again. So this regenerative thing, I really liked. And this is also something that is not new. When we did a project in Peru, Peruvian Amazon, this Caleria community, they already told me, like, hey, Seb, we see the forest not as timber. For us, the forest, it's our shop, not a shop, but it's our life. It's not only timber, it's also our medicine, it's the products for our crafts. It's everything we need. And I think I like that view of how it depends on how you view things. So that was my first quest of the role of a designer. And then the second one, even more important, especially here, how can you thrive as a designer? How can you earn your money? How can you feed your family? Being a designer, not only focusing on this one. It's interesting, and I don't know the solution yet, but we're getting there. Because we are seeing a whole transition of the whole system, the whole society that moves to an understanding that, okay, maybe we have to rebalance ourselves and have to put the profit in different terms. So we have social profit, we have environmental profit, and of course we have the economical profit. And if you look in the classic way of earning your money as an industrial designer, it's a percentage, it's a royalty. But then, if you look at that, then as a designer, you directly are part of this economical thinking, this capitalistic thinking, because then you need to design as much as possible and sell as much as possible to gain some money. So what if I want to be a designer, I want to create things, objects, services, whatever, but I don't want to contribute to this one that we only concentrate on the economical side. I take you to the Philippines again, another island. There's a whole community who is working with mooring ropes, old shipping ropes. They dismantle them and they reuse them to make new ropes. It's a whole community, everyone is working on them. So what we did with them is we created some possible solutions, possible new ways of using these mooring ropes, not with the intention, again, to sell those, but to inspire people. Of course, as a designer, then you go to the Salone del Mobile in Milan. We showed the objects in an environment where we also had the video, searching for people, other creatives, other designers, other companies, to help us find new solutions with this one. It took us a while, I must be honest. It took us 3-4 years, where we found a company, a Belgian company, who produces rugs. So we made this rug out of the shipping ropes from this community. Wow, successful. We had a lot of attention, we had a lot of press, we had a lot of awards, but we did not sell one. And the reason why, and no, we have to be honest, some things are not ripe at the moment or at a certain time. At that point, we saw, or the company saw, this rug here, it cost us too much. It's more expensive than just having new virgin materials. And that was really the explanation or the reason why they killed the project, because in the end, the outcome was too expensive. But in my idea, it was just, it had more value. But 8 years later, I got a message, or I'm talking with a company who has the biggest naval fleet, or operating the biggest naval fleet in the world, and they have, of course, a lot of ropes, mooring ropes. You would think, okay, what's the problem? The problem is that their clients, when they buy new ropes, they want to give their old ones back. And previously, before they could ship their old ropes to wherever, they would burn them or they would recycle them. But now it becomes more and more strict. So they have a challenge. I was going to say a problem, but it's a challenge because they have a lot of mooring ropes now, which they have to do something with it. And they set up a whole new non-profit organization. And we are going to look now at possibilities how we can implement or use the technologies or the know-how from the community in the Philippines as well. But I'm talking about 8 years later. So some things have to trigger in a time. The time could not be ripe for it, but at one point it pops up. Another project, and I think it's the last one because my time is running out here, is ontketen. Ontketen, it means literally unchain. It's a project in Belgium because yes, we also do projects locally in Belgium. And here we work together with a new tech startup who made a bio-based material. Oh, I'm doing something I should not do. A bio-based material made out of local fibers. It's a social workshop who actually do the green maintenance, and we can use those fibers to make a new bio-based material. The interesting thing is that there is a lot of new materials. It's a big trend, like everyone is making now new materials. But the challenge there is not to make a material and then search for new opportunities or new possible ways to implement them. No, the challenge is to find companies to believe in it and also make them believe and try to convince to work together to develop the material with you. And that's what we did. So we made an open call in the design community in Belgium, where we connected 3 design studios and 3 producing companies to work together for a new outcome made out of a bio-based material. So basically what happened in all this short time is that we had 3 studios, 3 companies, one company who's making cupboards and organizing things for your kitchen. There is a company who makes light switches, and there's a company who makes industrial lighting. I'm going to pick at one, the one who is most disruptive. And it's the case of Esther. Esther is actually a textile designer. And we challenged Esther and the company Nico to work together. And first they were like, why should we work with a textile designer? But I tell you why. It's her profession to work with tactility, with structures, with colors. And what Nico is actually doing is also, you have to touch your light switches. You have to go back to the feeling. So they work together, I mean all 3 studios work together, with an outcome in this bio-based material. So we have an organizer, we have a light switch where you could actually feel again. So it's not a smooth surface, it's not a screen, but you actually feel a material again. And we have the emergency lighting, which you also have here, but then a bio-based version. And what I like about it is that we literally challenged the companies to go with us, to search this with us. It took us 3 years. And now I hope, or we hope, that all of these products will have their place in society, or they will be further developed to become reality. So I want to kind of close this presentation because even when my time is freezed, so I'm literally over my time. But why I really like this project is that this describes also the role of a designer. My role in this part was creating this context. I did not make any object. I did not design any product. But what I did, creating the context where this was possible, where other people could thrive, where other professionals could do their best into a new, in this case, a new bio-based solution. And that is actually my search up until today, like what could be the role of a designer. And even that is designing.
Okay, so I am very grateful to be here. I feel like I'm a weird amalgamation of our last 2 wonderful speakers. I am both an industrial designer and a sociologist. Can you believe it? It's like they curated it perfectly. I am extremely passionate about how we can use design as a catalyst for change. And for the last 15 or 20 years of my career, I've been trying to understand how we can use design to design a future that works better for all of us, not just some of us, as it seems to do right now. Okay. So I founded something called the Unschool of Disruptive Design because in my own learning experience in academia, I realized that I missed a huge piece of really critical information, which was that everything in nature is interconnected, including us, and that perhaps as humans, our goal in life is to figure out how to give back more than we take, and design perhaps is the tool to do that, maybe not. So I quit design school, became a sociologist, ended up going back and doing a PhD in how to use design as a transformative change. And then I ran away to New York and founded a school for adults called the Unschool of Disruptive Design, of which has been around for 10 years. We've run programs all over the world with emerging leaders and established people who want to figure out how to use creativity as a tool for transformation. We've run programs in Kuching, in Sao Paulo, in New York, in Melbourne, and really it's about bringing people together who want to learn systems thinking, sustainability, and design. So anyway, I was named Champion of the Earth. It's really great. I love it. I want a bomber jacket and I want a secret badge that I can pull out when people are letting helium balloons off next to oceans and so forth. But actually, really what I'm deeply passionate about is equipping the design community with the tools of transformation so that we can make a world that works better for all of us. But it's not just designers, right? Like every single one of us who works in the design industry know we get a brief that has some sort of data that's come into it that said, oh, well, you know, people really want a faster X or a smoother Y. And then we take that data and we figure out how to make that better product or that better innovation. And so consumers, everyday people, citizens, we're just as important in this cycle of transformation. And so I was fortunate enough to work with the UN to create this toolkit called the Anatomy of Action, which is based on like scientific data. If every single one of us took changes in our lifestyles, how would we be able to affect the economy so that we created a more sustainable future? And it turns out there are everyday things that we do that really have big impacts, like the food we buy and eat, the stuff that we use, how we move around our cities, how we invest our money. Like divestment, it's been a huge influencing factor in how now ESG, or environmental social governance, is playing out in the financial sector. Individuals choosing to move their money from superannuation funds or from banks. We have power in the choices that we make. And it really does add up. All that data that we get as designers, that is individual actions, and it's all connected. And so we actually can contribute to designing a better world, both as citizens and as the people who interpret that data into usable goods and services. But in my day job, I work with big companies. I work with some of the biggest companies in the world, and I have amazing conversations about design and innovation. And sometimes we have conversations about sustainability, and it's really disturbing because I'm very worried about how little they know or what they think it means. So essentially what happens, what I see anyway with working with these big companies, is that they're really struggling to figure this out because consumers are demanding change, workers are trying to make change, and then you've got the reality of the economy that we exist within, which is a linear, unsustainable, waste-driven economy. That's what we live in. That's what we've had since industrialization. It's made a lot of people a lot of money, but unfortunately it's created a lot of externalities like climate crisis, the waste problem, inequity, biodiversity loss, the bees, the poor bees. Oh, snicker, got a snicker, okay. Just figuring you all out. So I decided a couple years ago to create a new platform to help companies transform to sustainability, and it's called Swivel Skills, and it's really about the fact, because, okay, this is the other thing I learned at the Unschool. So I'd have all these people, we've had thousands and thousands of people come to the Unschool, and they all quit their jobs. And then I feel really bad because I've just educated them in all of this transformative stuff, and then they're like, I'm out of there. And then I think, someone's got to get your job who doesn't give a shit about anything, and now we're just going to keep going around the same cycle. So I kind of had this like, shit, I got to stop people from quitting their jobs, right? I've transformed them too much, so I need you to stay in your jobs and transform the companies from the inside. And so I started to realize that that's really one of the big issues, is that you have all these creative, intelligent, interesting people going out and like, you know, going real rogue on us, which is great, but then you have companies who can just keep, you know, feeding their, you know, employment stock with people who perhaps aren't ready to question or challenge or disrupt. So anyway, we're working on this right now, and it's a big and exciting thing to figure out how we can transform an entire company or corporation from the inside out by training every single person. Do you all know what OH&S means? No? Wonder if it's a different acronym in German. Occupational health and safety? Do you all know how to not kill yourself in a workplace? Oh, shit. Well, hopefully it's just been around long enough that you guys, it's so embedded in your culture. But in the 80s, it was a really big issue where people were dying in the workplace. There wasn't safety standards that prevented people from, having their hair ripped out from a machinery or from sitting too long and getting back problems. It was a really big cultural transformation in the corporate world. And I want the same change when it comes to sustainability and design and creativity, where not only do we see the value of creativity and design in constructing the world, but also in the role that sustainability can play in us designing a better future. So the status quo bias is that we believe what we're told and that we do not have the power to create a better future. The only thing that I know to be true about anything in this world, I know a few things, but this one is very good, and that is that we don't know the future until it comes. And we are part of the system that makes the future. And this, to me, is the most empowering, exciting, kind of scary thing, because we have the possibility to create the doom or gloom, or to create something that's completely different, to disrupt the status quo. And you see, creativity, in my mind, is really about loving that problem, but with a purpose to do something better, to create something that doesn't exist. And right now, what doesn't exist is an abundance of possibility that is better than the negative story that we're told. And that abundance comes from us thinking about how we can design the things we need in ways that don't destroy the planet and that don't have negative effects on other people. And yes, maybe that's like a magic potion. That would be great. And I want to challenge you to think, is this possible? Is it possible for you, every single one of us, to think differently about how we do our jobs, how we live as people, how we work as a community, how design as a profession plays out its role in the world? Basically, we're the cultural provocateurs of the future, and there's all of these ways we know that to be true, other than the things that we create that then become fads. It's also because we know how to manipulate people's minds and change their bodies. There's this whole thing called tech neck now because we're also hunched over our phones, but when it was the Nokias, they thought our thumbs were getting longer because of all the texting. You all remember Nokias, right? I always say, don't be Nokia. That's another story. Anyway, so dark patterns are the use of cognitive biases and other heuristics from cognitive science to figure out how to manipulate all of us to stay addicted to our technical devices. This action. Do you know what this is based off? Continuous scroll? Who knows? 5 points if you answer it correctly. Yes, young lady in the front. It triggers dopamine, which is a neurochemical, but it's based off a slot machine, like the pokies. And it works. I'm so addicted to continuous scroll. I have to be like, put the phone down. Don't ever let me in a casino. That's what I have to say, right? The guy who invented the little like button doesn't let his children use the thing that he created because he knows how much it triggers our emotional reactions. But this is everywhere, right? We have hostile architecture. We have deception in the design that we create. And those of us who design things in nice air-conditioned offices, we forget the impact and influence that we're going to have on people's lives. And some of them really unintended consequences and negative at that. So design, as blessed as it be, has created a shit ton of problems, just to be completely frank. And so I only have 3 minutes left. Jesus Christ. Okay, one of them is climate change. I need to tell you more about that. It's embedded in everything. Who likes using ChatGPT? It's not me. Who has invested in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies? Oh, okay, just a few of you. Right. Well, both of those seemingly invisible, well, not invisible, but seemingly unimpactful things have massive impacts on the environment because they all require energy, which in most economies right now is fossil fuel energy, right? So both of those technologies, they use up the same energy as small countries. So every time you're like, this is fun, new toy, gadget, that has a physical impact on the planet. The actions that we take have impacts, and we've also normalized culturally this idea that waste is totally fine, that it's not a big issue, that you can get a coffee cup and instead of sitting down and drinking it in a reusable one, you can get it in a disposable one because it's made from paper and therefore it's recyclable and that's fine, but they're actually lined with plastic, which makes them unrecyclable. We've devalued nature. And this, to me, is the fundamental flaw. Yes, humans have desires. Yes, we have technology. And God, can we create some really incredible things. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. Or at least it means that we should really question the impacts of our actions before we take them, so that the solutions that we bring to the table are better for us all. And I believe that one of the big problems here is that most of design, unfortunately, is based on devaluing things. We think we're making value, but actually we're taking away. But I have hope that we can change this, because I do believe that those of us who are designers can play a part in creating a culture, but those of us who are citizens can also influence the system around us. And this is the thing about sustainability. It's about redesigning the problem. Many of you have heard of the circular economy, which I think is the biggest disruption of this decade. If your company, organization, or workplace is not involved in this, I'd like to see you last past 2030. I think the reality is that we are learning how to take materials that are destined for waste, and we're figuring out how to cycle them through a system to create new goods and values. But ultimately, the big thing about the circular economy is us changing our relationship to goods, and designers figuring out how to create new business models that give you that dopamine hit, but without the negative outcomes. And that requires a lot of foresight and thinking and creativity. So who has the power to create a better future? Do you guys believe you have that power? Oh, bless you. Yes, okay, I'm done now. Actually, that has run out, but I still have a few more slides, so I'm going to steal some time, I'm sorry. So here's the thing. A lot of people don't believe they have the agency to make change. And I don't mean the design agency. I mean the sociological term of us having our own perception of the role that we play in the world and how we can influence the people around us. We all have agency. We all have some sort of power or influence. And for some, it's bigger than others, and over time, we can grow it. But the reality is that the system wants us to believe that we do not have the power or agency to disrupt it. And that is the big challenge, first and foremost, is to reconsider ourselves and the role that we play in the system around us. You know, we need to put the value back into everyday things, because yes, we have needs, and yes, we have desires, and yes, we need goods and services, and we do need a functioning and healthy economy, but we need to do that in ways that doesn't detract, but it builds. You know, one thing I learned being a farmer was that there's no such thing as waste in nature, and that everything that dies is actually the foundations for new life, and that everything that is disrupted is actually just reconformed, and we have these building blocks that come together and they create entirely new things. In systems thinking, it's called emergence. Everything in nature is an emergent outcome of the conditions, and we can emerge a new system and a new way of doing things if we understand how to work within what's called metabolisms. Right? Because the circular economy is essentially saying, right now, this stuff we make, this plastic, this hyper-complex stuff we make, it does not get metabolized back into nature. It becomes a product that becomes a problem. Waste is an issue because it pollutes, creates that layers of Anthropocene stuff. And so we need to figure out how to make products and services, be it cars or phones or coffee cups, that can be metabolized back into the natural world, and potentially also offer back more, right? That's the really important and exciting thing. So, oh, I got a whole new 20 minutes, thanks. I'm so going to take it all. So we are all cultural curators, right? And I'm a massive fan of systems thinking, and I believe truly that the problems that we face today are just the great ideas of someone from the past, probably an old white guy, to be completely honest, but we all have the ability to create solutions today that don't become tomorrow's problems if we understand the system that we're working within, and we need to really challenge the status quo. Another really awesome person you can add to your Wikipedia list is Buckminster Fuller. Any Bucky fans? Great, we'll all hang out later. Buckminster Fuller is the father, I would say the godfather of sustainable design, and also figured out how to make the geodesic dome, said a number of wonderful things, including there is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it will be a butterfly, which I think is a beautiful lesson in life. And he also says the best way to predict the future is to design it, which I love because we can design this future. And this is really something that inspired me in my career, and I guess I've been invited here to tell you about something that I created called the disruptive design method, which is really about using a system to understand how to interrupt the status quo. So we heard all these interpretations of disruption, but for me, disruption is about intent, and it's about integrity, and it's about understanding the complexity, the power, the flows and relationships within a system so that then you can beautifully come in and change the way it operates. It's not about running into a room and creating a lot of chaos, although I like to do that too. It's really about understanding how the status quo is and figuring out how to design an alternative model. And it's about knowing where to intervene in the system so that you create the right pressure at the right point so the whole thing changes. To me, this is beautiful. Buckminster Fuller, on his tombstone, it says, "Call me trim tab." The trim tab is the smallest part of the biggest boat. It's inside the rudder. When the wheel is turned, this tiny little thing moves and the whole ship is therefore turned. And he had that put on his tombstone because he wanted everybody to be reminded that each of us have the ability as the smallest part of the system to make the biggest change. That inspired me in my whole career, the last 20 years, thank you, Bucky, to figure out how we can all be positively disruptive forces in creativity or not, in whatever we do, in figuring out how we can design a future that works better than today. And so the disruptive design method operates as a scaffolding. Like if you're going to build a building, you want to put some sort of exoskeleton up, right, as you're building those levels. It helps us understand how we can mine a problem. We can look at the system. So we mine a problem, which is where we suspend the need to solve. We take the problem on the date. We then come to the landscaping phase, which is systems, where we come up like a bird's eye view and we see the interrelationships of what's going on in the system we wish to disrupt. And then we come in with design skills and we create a solution that challenges the status quo of the system. And this to me is really important because essentially what it's doing is it's holding off this ability that we have as designers to really come up with a lot of solutions really quickly and maybe not truly understand the dynamics and what's going on within the system. So, I'm not going to explain these things because I don't have time. I've already taken up too much of your time, but come to me and talk to me about systems thinking. I want to end with this idea that the one thing that I've learned in all of the years of doing this work is that no matter what we do, we are all interdependent. We all rely on each other, the systems around us, be it natural or not, and we have the ability to influence and affect the systems in which we participate in. And the linear system is the absolute first and foremost system in which we need to disrupt. It is unsustainable, it is inequitable, and it's bloody wasteful, which is just stupid, really, because waste is just a lost resource. There are multiple solutions that already exist. As a designer right now, you can educate yourself very quickly on all of the ways in which we can design for a better world, be it the sustainable design or circular design approaches. But the most important thing is we set the right goal. Because if we try to design for the wrong problem, then we're going to keep creating the same solutions. And I believe truly that the design industry is in a perfect position, whether it be fashion, industrial, experience, doesn't matter what flavor of designer you are, we have the ability to challenge the brief. We can say to our clients and customers, like, do you really need to design this and can we not deliver this as a better service? Can we not change the relationship that we have? I always say to designers, you're the ones who are being paid to come up with the solutions, so don't give them the crappy, unsustainable solutions. Give them a really cool one that happens to solve the world's problems. They won't know what they're not getting. That's subversive design. And I truly believe that if we work with our political leaders as well, then we can have design transform policy. But not only that, perhaps we would be open to the idea of some sort of policy to help transform design. You know, it's one of the only industries with such a far-reaching effect that doesn't have any codes of conduct or kind of at least tick a box and not, you know, openly admit you're going to ruin things. So I would love to see communities around the world set policies for the behaviors, ethics, equity, responsibility, creativity, and possibility of the design community, where ultimately we create products and services that do not take away from the systems at play, but actually give back. And if all of us were working to that same goal, it would make it a lot harder for those players in the market to create the crap to sell to idiots that create the problems that we're all trying to solve right now. And so this, to me, is a really beautiful unifying thing. I think if we work together, we can metamorphosize into an industry that provides those solutions for tomorrow that we can all be proud of, transforming away from an industry that serves industry. An industry that serves industry. An industry that serves the industrial economy, capitalism, and exploitation to one that is regenerative, it is supportive, and hopefully it's still beautiful. Thank you.
All right, here we are. Well, what an inspiration you all are. Thank you so much for your talks, for those fireworks of inspiration. I'm excited to spend the next 25 or 30 minutes asking you let's say some of the approximately 3,000 questions that you brought up in my mind. And I want to bring us back to this year's theme, why disruption unleashes creativity. And Sascha, I want to start with you. So you gave us this beautiful visual of the house, right? And one thing you said is, it's tough to know where you are in this house, right? It may or may not be as disruptive as you think. And I'm curious, can you talk a little more about how do we deal with that as designers when we're essentially lost in that house, trying to maybe be disruptive or maybe not? Tell us more.
I think it very much relates to Leyla's talk about why you want to do the things that you want to do. So I think we covered all stories of the house, and a lot of the things that Leyla has talked about, for instance, circular economy, clearly is a shift in the foundations of how society works. The question is, do you work on that problem in the context of an organization that gives you a brief where management attention goes to this is the new fate, this is the new age that we live in, or is this something that you consciously decide, this is what I want to work on? And my perspective, because a lot of the theory on disruption comes from management, was that oftentimes, because these claims are so broad, AI is going to change how creativity works, people think that they are in the wrong story than they actually are, and then management attention gets diverted to something very structural and takes that attention away from the everyday issues that they actually have to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, Leyla, I want to pick up on something that you talked about, because I think, you made it clear, we have the power in choices we make, we have agency, but we also have cognitive bias. How do those two things go together?
So I'm not a therapist. I feel this is a conversation for a therapist. Yeah, I will answer that, but can I just add to what you said? A lot of big design agencies have been bought by management consultancies, and you just made me form this really interesting synapses in my brain, which is, management is about control, and the history of management, if you look at Taylorism and what Ford did, was really about, extracting the most utility out of the individuals through controlled systems and the time studies of how long it took for people to do things, and very much an industrial mindset around individuals being worker bees for the industrial economy. And that control mechanism also is part of how we ended up controlling nature and believing that we were dominant over the natural world, when we're now discovering we're kind of part of it and in desperate need of its services for our own sustainment. So it made me think, well, how does design fit into that in the modern age, where most of these big design agencies that we all know and respect are now being controlled or managed by management consultancies, right? Which have their bread and butter in coming in and saying, oh, you know what, we've got this new, slightly improved way of managing your system. Yeah, I don't know the answer, but it just made me really think about this kind of conflict, or like a kind of butting of heads, because design should be creative. It should be by its very nature disruptive. It should be challenging. It should be transformative. But when you kind of commercialize it, it ultimately becomes just another tool in extracting resources from the system that you're working in, be it workers or be it nature. And so I will circle back to answering your question. I think the reality is that cognitive bias is both a curse and a blessing, in not equal measure. It really depends on who you are. Ultimately, we are all affected by these, but we're also able to reflect and recode our own biases. They are a product of our collective experience. They're also contagious. So we learn to be fearful of certain people based on media and what other people tell us. We learn to appreciate and respect other people based on media and what other people tell us. And we are in great cultural transformation right now when it comes to rights for non-normal people, right? Whether it be your gender, your identity, for sexuality, all of these factors are now helping to liberate a lot of parts of culture and society. But at the same time, like, we are all the product of the system in which we exist within. We are. So we're kind of in this dynamic relationship, and I think design and all of the artifacts and things that we create are in some way representative of that, but also at the same time challenging it, because one design, one intervention can like really spin us out to a whole other world, like what's happening with AI right now, or any other of these big, I'm going to use the word disruptive, I've used my quota now, disruptive forces that are challenging the status quo. And some are having really positive outcomes, like the circular economy and so forth, and others are having these kind of like, well, where's this going to go? And so I really challenge back to my idea that we need to have some sort of accountability. We need to have some frameworks. We need some guidelines, some parameters to be able to operate in our own consciousness, but also culturally, so that we get us to the destination that we need to go to, you know. And I think that that's really the big challenge here, is us as a culture defining what that is collectively.
Picking up on a few of the things that you talked about, Seb, you showed us this kind of diagram framework where profit is not only designed economically, and yet you just gotta, pay your bills somehow. I'm curious, how are you experiencing that? How are you making those three types of profit work for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting, a few years ago, my accountant asked me, like, hey, Seb, I see you there, and you're doing lots of projects there, and I see you in the press, and you win awards. How come I don't see it in your account? And I told him, like, okay, but we have a lot of social profit, we meet a lot of people, we have great relations. And then I tell him, like, okay, later, when I'm on my pension, I will visit all the people I worked with. I have good relations with them, I can work together with them, I can just spend time with them. And that's kind of my investment in kind of a way. Could be weird to say.
Your retirement fund.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about my retirement. No, I think it's more, and it's already happening in the systems, that we don't think about the linear ones, but indeed more about services. And that's actually the point I wanted to make in our projects. We started also with objects, but in the end, I showed the project where we're more designing the context. I think there, providing this knowledge sharing, there is literally a business model on its own. And you need the designer to know the context. And we were talking about, okay, in this big system, you have to know what is in this system. And I think a designer could potentially have a good overview and all the pioneers or all the people or all the factors that are creating the system this way. And I think that's where we as a designer can change those ones.
Absolutely.
But you need to know where...
You need to know the system,
yeah, you need to
know where to put the intervention.
It's like the game. You need to know the rules of the game in order to change them. That's why, for example, I worked for 2.5 years in a furniture company. And I was feeling like a spy. I was like, I'm not doing furniture designing here. I want to know how they work here. They produced in Indonesia. I got to know all those things that you never see as a customer or even as a designer at school. And so I was like, 007, whatever.
Subversive design.
Well, it's also part of not just turning your back to everything that exists, right? As you talked about. I'm curious, Sascha, what's your take on social profit?
When we talked about future a lot, and sometimes it's so we just did and just shot an episode about future and how we have such a hard time living in the here and now because constantly we see the future on the horizon. So we're thinking about it all the time. And to something that Leyla alluded to is there's not only a future that's more possible than another future, when we can say, well, we predict that this is coming out, but there's also ways of the future that are more preferable than others. And by like all this system thinking and how to intervene needs, the first step we need is to think about a preferable future where we would like to go to and then design an intervention to get there. And I think oftentimes we don't spend enough time on doing exactly that. So what would be preferable to have in 5 years, and how can we get there before? Because in a lot of the stuff I talked about in this disruption is like a force that comes from us. Somebody comes into the market. We only have to react to it in a way, instead of thinking about what would be a preferable outcome of a future and then design steps to get there. And to the other point that Leyla talked about, we actually had a PhD student. She did a ethnography on a merger of a design firm and a large consultancy, and she used the theory of liminality. So liminality basically is this in-between space. So, for instance, when you are engaged, you aren't single anymore, but you're also not married. And she used this liminality theory to describe that these designers didn't really understand who they are now, because they clearly weren't designers anymore, but they also weren't consultants. And so she used the theory to to figure out, do they leave or do they change, or what do they do in this between space of the merger? So I found that very interesting. That's also for the people involved. They don't really understand what does it mean for us. Who are we now?
Fascinating. And so the last question I want to ask you before you all get to have your drinks is, what is one thing that each of you hope that folks in the audience will act on as a result of what they've heard tonight? Do you want to start us off, Leyla?
Can we do it for each of... Can I do it for them?
Oh, that's a great idea. Go for it.
Sorry. I mean, I hope that people act on your provocation around longevity and integrity and weaving things together and experiencing that in a more meditative state. Because when we create, we can create with gusto and intensity, but also we can create with slowness and beauty. And there's something about time and pace, and that can really perhaps help us create more valuable things in society.
Mm-hmm. Love that. What's one thing that... Sascha.
I said earlier that whenever you take a technology and throw it into a group of people, something happens that's not the intent of the people that designed the technology. So whatever happens after the introduction of a technology is not baked into the technology, but it's basically a socio-technical, iterative process. And I think to act on that means to understand that that's a thing. So the question was, I think, said earlier by someone, like, does AI disrupt human creativity, is not a question we can answer right now, because we don't have the evidence on how people play with it and do something with it, and to understand that that's comes from us and that's our agency to play with it and see if we can do something better. That, I think, is something to act on, that every single person who designs something also has the potential to take technology, play with it, and shift that into a different direction.
That's cool. That's cool. So.
Yeah, now the pressure is higher. I think the sailing boat effect I really liked, and if you think about it, we are in this right now. So everyone is looking for solutions, everyone is going crazy, doing stupid things, doing good things maybe. But in the end, there will be things, we have to let loose some of the things that we are used to. And I think when we start realizing that it's turbulent right now, we know, we feel it in society and in just even in human contact. But there is something coming, and it's just wait for it and act. Yeah.
Wait for it. I think that's an excellent note to send us off to the bar.
Wait. What about you? Because you've just interviewed us, but you've got so many things to add.
How am I possibly going to be able to summarize that in a moment? I would say that what I'm taking away is that disruption is often used as a word that implies a certain value or movement or something, really more in a marketing way. Like, yeah, we disrupted it. And it's used without actually understanding where it comes from or what the impacts are or what context you might need to create for it. And So I wish that what we're taking away and acting on is that when we actually use that language, and also as we encounter it throughout the week in the program of MCBW, of Munich Creative Business Week, we look for all of those aspects that we heard about and talk about all of those different aspects, because this has given us so much more richness than what I think we had 3-4 hours ago when we all sat down here. So I think it was a gift to be with you. I thank you for that. I thank you all for being here and for staying with us. And I'm excited to join you all for drinks now. Thank you.